It's an honor and a privilege for me to, and certainly a great pleasure as well, to be able to preside over this event today. I've known Preston and Connie at first from a distance when Preston first came to Harvard while I was a finishing PhD student some 40 years ago over in the Yard in the History of Religion, but often over here for the occasional course. And then later, through more frequent, if small, contact when he served as acting dean here in the Divinity School. I believe that was in 74, 75. And when I was actually living in the Center for World Religions as a young assistant professor in the Yard. So I saw something of them then on occasion, even though I wasn't in the Divinity School. Next, with increasing frequency through contacts in the Committee on the Study of Religion with our PhD and THD graduate students, in the 80s and 90s, and then finally as one of our senior scholars and pillars of the faculty here at HDS after I came over to be dean in 2002. I was able to celebrate his retirement even shortly thereafter and to work with him on the Summer Leadership Institute for a number of years here in the summers at HDS. I won't today rehearse his distinguished service to this university and this school. We will have, I think, something of an encomium from one of his longtime colleagues, Harvey Cox, in a few moments. But I do want to say that it could not be more fitting, I think, for the Harvard Foundation and the university to be recognizing Preston Williams through a permanent portrait that will hang for future generations to see and to contemplate here in Harvard Divinity School, a place to which he has devoted 4 decades of service as teacher, mentor, colleague, friend, and scholar. I'm honored and privileged, as I said, to be here and to be the presiding dean at this moment on what I think is an important landmark occasion, one when the first African-American tenured scholar in this school is thus memorialized for his signal service to both HDS and the wider Harvard community. It is in good part due to Preston's trailblazing presence here over many years that we can have the kind of convocation program that those of you who are staying around for our convocation at 5 o'clock will find today, because it focuses on the issue of diversity and has 3 of our faculty that work in this area speaking to us today. Now, however, I would like to turn the podium over to my longtime colleague and friend, the Gunt Professor of Neuroscience and Harvard College Professor John Dowling, who as chair of the Harvard Foundation's Faculty Advisory Committee will be standing in today for Dr. Alan Counter, whose recent illness has made it impossible for him to be with us as he had planned, even though he asked me this morning to send his greetings. John, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very, very much, Bill. And as present chair of the Harvard Foundation Portraiture Committee, I'm delighted to help with the unveiling of the portrait of Preston Williams this afternoon. It's an honor to collaborate with the Harvard Divinity School in preserving the legacy of Professor Williams by placing his portrait here in the Brown Room of Andover Hall. This portrait not only celebrates the very many accomplishments of Dr. Williams, but also continues the mission of the Harvard Foundation Portraiture Project to recognize the diversity of individuals who have served Harvard University with distinction for 25 or more years, and as far as Preston is concerned, it's considerably more than 25 years, by honoring their contributions with a portrait. The Harvard Foundation Portraiture Committee was founded and chaired for many years by the late Reverend Professor Peter Gomes, who wished to extend the Harvard Foundation's mission of diversity by honoring those persons of Afro-American, Asian American, Latino American, and Native American backgrounds who deserve special recognition for their tremendous service to Harvard. The portraits are placed in carefully selected locations, in the college houses and certain university buildings, so that all members of the Harvard community, but especially students, may be inspired by their contributions. Now, Alan Counter, the director of the Harvard Foundation, is very disappointed that he could not be here today. As Bill mentioned, He is ill, but is recovering nicely. I'd also like to recognize the portraiture artist, Mr. Stephen Coit, who will be making a few remarks later on. And finally, I would like to thank Dean Graham and our colleagues at the Harvard Divinity School for their help in honoring such a distinguished and remarkable man, Preston Williams. Now, before Bill and I unveil the portrait, and I know you're very anxious to see it, I wish to call on my good friend and a member of the Portraiture Committee, David Evans, to make a few remarks. David, come forward.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Bill. Thank all of you for coming and joining us to honor this man, this worthy and honorable man who has done so much, not just for this school, but for Harvard College, where I've worked for going on 42 years. When Preston came, there were essentially no African-American faculty throughout the university. So if he had done only those things defined on his job description, we would have suffered greatly. But he extended himself to students at the undergraduate level and otherwise, and we are the better for that. We thank you very much for having done that. I like to think of, in this society where the median age of the American people is 36.8, and the median age of African Americans is 31.3. So median age Joe wasn't even alive when Preston came here. And median age Jamal hadn't even been thought about. But Preston has been with us as a contributor, as a friend, and a good husband to Connie, and father to his son who went here, and the others, for more than a tenth of the existence of Harvard University. That is a statement, and I think that should make him worthy of not just his likeness here, but to be written about and talked about and remembered by all who pass through these portals. It is said that if we watch the sunset, nothing seems to change until it drops beyond the horizon. But if we take time-lapse photographs of what is going on and come back and review them, we'll find that much changed, some subtle and some obvious. I urge you to go and look at the Facebooks of 70 years ago, 60, 50, 40, 20, down to today, and you'll see that much has changed. And this is one of our contributions to that change, this portrait today. Thank you, Preston.
Offer the toast?
I will. And I think before we hear a few more words, it's an appropriate time to raise our glasses in a toast to our honoree today. Preston, if you would just stand. I know you're going to speak in a moment, but a toast to you for all we've had here.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Great.
Thanks, John. I'm now going to call on my longtime colleague, Harvey Cox, the Hollis Research Professor of Divinity and a longtime colleague and friend of our honoree today, to make a few words, to have a few words. Harvey, please.
Thank you, Bill, Preston, and Connie. What a joy and honor and privilege for me. I can think of no other colleague for whom I would be happier to be at an unveiling of his portrait than you, Preston. And I want everyone here in the room to know that what we have just witnessed is an apocalyptic event. Because everyone here who's taken New Testament 100 knows that apocalypse means unveiling. We have just had an unveiling, an apocalypse. But in some ways, Preston's career has been apocalyptic in many ways. Not only the first black dean of the Harvard Divinity School, first African-American president of the American Academy of Religion and of the Society for Christian Ethics, and maybe a few other things that I haven't quite researched yet. And now the first portrait of an African-American here in our Brown Room. The Brown Room, up until today, has been actually very white. Now, it's also, up until very recent years, been rather male. But now, I think we're all happy to see that the diversity is beginning to emerge, and not only in the walls, but everywhere. Now, as I was preparing for this, I thought about all the things I know and have learned about Preston Williams over the years, and I made a little list of those things of which I am envious, and those things of which I'm not so envious, and another list of things about which I'm a little ambivalent. Let me start with the fact that Preston Williams was a Phi Beta Kappa, and I was not. Let me also mention that he was an editor of the Christian Century, and I never was. If I had been, I probably would have recruited more friendly reviews for my books in that journal. There are some things that I don't particularly envy. His being dean, for example, or his being president of all those associations. That all seems like a lot of work to me. I'm ambivalent about his being a Presbyterian. When I was a Baptist kid growing up in a small town in Pennsylvania, we thought of the Presbyterians as being a little stiff, a little too formal. But I thank Preston for having broken that stereotype over many years. Now, we could list lots and lots of accomplishments, and you'll hear some more of them today before the day is out. My guess is that Preston would want us to mention especially his founding and his leadership in the Summer Leadership Institute. I think one of his most formidable and memorable contributions, which I think started back in 1995, as I recall. Second was his being the founding director of the Du Bois Institute, which also goes back a few years. However, my suspicion is that the thing that Preston will be most remembered for, and should be most remembered for, is that like our common mentor, James Luther Adams, with whom we both studied, he devoted a whole career to mentoring young scholars, to encouraging them, to chiding them, to coercing them, advising them, warning them, and helping to make them into the mature scholars they turned out to be. There's a whole generation, I was about to say younger scholars, they're not as young as they were when you were mentoring them, who owe that mentoring to Preston Williams. Now, if you look very carefully at this portrait behind you, which I saw first only in a very small slide, and I mentioned, I think, to Steve Coit that in seeing the small slide there, I couldn't really see Connie next to Preston. And he said, well, the problem is, how would you have gotten her to sit still long enough to have her portrait? Now, however, that I see the full portrait, and if you look at it very, very carefully, you will see Connie there. If you don't see Connie in that portrait, it's either because you don't have any visual imagination or because you don't realize the long partnership of this dynamic duo. Connie's there, and every time I see that portrait, I'll see Connie there as well. Now, I want to end what is a very short contribution here by quoting something from the Old Testament. I know that Presbyterians really like the Old Testament. It's that creeping legalism that gets into them through Calvin and on. That's why we have Baptists, to correct some of that. Here is a verse from Psalms 127 that I would like to leave you with, my friend and colleague, Preston Williams. It talks about children. Your two children, Mark Gordon and David, are both children of Presbyterians, and they have, like good Presbyterians, done well and done good in their careers, or I should say, done good and also done well. But your children also include all those many, many graduate students and others that you have mentored and guided, supported all these years. So the text, they are your children as well. So here's the text. Children are the arrows in the hand of a warrior, and happy is the man whose quiver is full of them. Preston, I salute you as a warrior. You certainly have been. You stood up for the right things throughout your life, and I admire you for that. I admire you as a warrior whose quiver is full.
Thank you very much. I now want to call on our artist who has done, this is not the first of these portraits that he's done, or the first time that I've seen him speak about his portraiture. I also was fortunate enough when the painting was nearly finished to get to see it. It's been nearly a year ago. Well, I don't guess it was last winter sometime. So it's a great pleasure to introduce our neighbor from down the street on Francis Avenue, Stephen Coit, the fine artist who has done the work before you now. So Steve, if you would come up and have a few words, we'd be grateful.
Sure. Thank you. And thank you to the Harvard Foundation for the opportunity to take on this project. It's one of about a dozen portraits I've done for the Harvard Foundation. And thank you very much, Preston, for your goodwill, patience, and courage. I don't know if you noticed, but there's a similarity between the portrait above and the portrait below. The portrait below is of Francis Parkman, the father of the historian. And I wonder how Reverend Parkman feels being so upstaged. I actually think he must feel honored, because I think it's a unique privilege here at Harvard. For the first time, somebody has been portrayed in a portrait twice, first below and second down below. I'm struck by the differences. I mean, think of the differences between the two individuals portrayed here. And I think it was on my mind as I chose to put the background scene in the Brown Room in the portrait of Preston. Reverend Parkman was born to a wealthy merchant family in Boston in 1788. He graduated from Harvard in 1807. He traveled to Europe on a grand tour, both studied and lectured at Cambridge and Oxford, and went to the continent, came back and became minister of the New North Church in Boston, which is still on Hanover Street. It's now a Catholic church, where he served for about 40 years, and he died in 1855. It was said of him, he was known for his kindness, his tolerance, his generosity, and it was said of him he had a uniform benevolence and kind feelings with which he regarded all around him. I think there are things these men share, and things they don't share. And I think what struck me is that, and I think you realize this as you paint, you realize things that you hadn't thought of at first. That I think Reverend Parkman he could not have conceived of this day and this portrait. It's a different world. And yet I think he would have been absolutely thrilled. Because the portrait above represents the change in the religious community, the change in what the challenges are, changes in the nation, and changes at Harvard. And that's what that portrait above means to me. Thank you.
Now we get to hear from the man himself. Preston, please come forward.
I'm going to be a bit formal, hope short, but I want to thank all of you for coming out today and participating in this unveiling. When Connie, Mark, David, and I came to Cambridge in 1961 from Penn State University, where I was serving as an assistant to Scott Harshbarger's father, we had no idea that the Boston metropolitan area would become our home, or that today's joyful event was in our future. The hanging of the portrait is indeed a great honor. I want to thank the Harvard Foundation and its director, Alan S. Counter, who couldn't be with us today, also Professor Dowling, David Evans, and the students from the foundation who are here. I want to thank them. I want to thank the Divinity School, Dean William Graham, the faculty, students, and staff. And I want to thank also the co-masters of Mather House, Doctors Sandra Madoff and Lee Haffrey. I've been associated with Mather House since 1974 and have worked with Sandra and Lee for 18 years. And certainly my selection is due in part to that particular work. This is a day of pleasure and celebration for my family and friends, saddened only by the absence of the Reverend Peter J. Gomes, who played a large part in bringing about the event. Former President Derek Bach, in his remarks at Peter's memorial service, stated that Peter had urged him to establish the Harvard Foundation and to adopt his approach for recognizing Harvard's diversity. Those of my family who are present here today knew Peter, knew his delightful humor, knew his gracious friendship. We are pleased to become a part of Peter's legacy. We miss him, but he will always be a part of our relationship to each other. I want to thank Stephen Coit for his portrait. It represents many hours of conversation, solicitation of understanding from others, and an extraordinarily skilled artistic work in depicting me. There's a portrait in my Belmont home that was painted in the 50s, and in that portrait, done by a congregant, I have a halo about my head. Steve has omitted the halo, and I want him to tell me at some time why he did that. There's also another portrait in the picture, and Steve has commented upon it. I am pleased also because we have this hanging of the portrait due to the activity of a number of students at Harvard University, including Divinity School students, who possessed the vision in 1969. Their actions helped bring about a more just social order and a more diverse Harvard. And that's why we're here today. And that's why women have been integrated into the mainstream of Harvard University. I would like to mention just a few of the Divinity School students who participated in that awakening for Harvard. Craig Lewis, Dominga Wassad, Christopher Natetta, and James Melvin Washington. And I might add, when I was retiring and they had a program celebrating me, James Washington echoed the sentiments of Harvey. He talked about their campaigning to bring an African American to the Harvard University community, and what did they get? A Presbyterian. The initiative of these students prepared the Divinity School and the World Religion Center for the Harvard Foundation's vision of diversity and inclusiveness. I am pleased that the unveiling takes place on this date, a date selected by others, not by me. It is a date close to the opening for the public viewing of the Martin Luther King Jr.'s monument and the anniversary of the 1963 March on Washington. More importantly, it is the birthday of my father, Anderson James Williams, Sr., who was born on this day in Alcaloo, South Carolina in 1888. My father and my mother, Bertha Bell McCrae, Scotch-Irish names, what we might add, would be very appreciative of this honor bestowed upon me by the Harvard Foundation and the Harvard Divinity School. My parents mightily struggled under segregation and discrimination to create opportunities for their sons and their grandchildren. They would be pleased to know also that my brother and his wife, Dr. Anderson James Williams, Jr., and Dr. Lois Williams were present for the event. Thank you.
Preston, thank you. And before we end and turn to refreshments and conviviality together to celebrate this wonderful day, I have a couple of little gifts for you and Connie. The first is going to be is already visible from here. Connie, a bouquet to take home at least for a few days. Preston, we have a little something for you that I think you should open here and show to everyone. This is for you also to take home. Don't want to hurt it. Beautifully done. We feel like this should be a memento for the family to have at home when they can't come into the Brown room to look at the portrait, right? Most welcome, Connie. I want to thank you all for being here. I want to also mention just one of the special members of the audience who is here. As you know, Preston Williams was for many years the Houghton professor here of Christianity and Contemporary Change, and we're very fortunate to have Amory Houghton here with us today as a member of the family that made this wonderful gift to the Divinity School, and that continues to give us now two Houghton professorships, and Amo has also been helping us and by serving on the Dean's Council here, and it's terrific to have you with us. Thank you so much for being here. Connie? Come.
Gracious hospitality when you came to visit them in New York and had a wonderful time soon after Preston became the Houghton professor. So thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you. That concludes our formalities. I now hope that everyone will have a chance to congratulate Preston and Connie on this in person, to enjoy conversation together, and perhaps to have a little bit of the bubbly in the back, or juice if you prefer. Thank you very much for being here. Preston, Connie, congratulations, and thank you both.